Luke 16, verses 19 through 31. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. And he called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner received evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." And he said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." And Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." And he said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone else goes to them from the dead, they will repent." And God said, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead."
I am the product, just like all of us are, of all the different influences that make up our lives. And I have been influenced, I find, when I approach the Bible, by my Sunday school teachers when I was 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. They influenced me. They, along with my grandparents and my parents, my colleagues, people in churches, they have influenced me in the way that I come and approach the Bible, the text itself. And I blame them for that. Because there are different ways to approach the biblical text, the scriptures. And when I approach them, I'm looking for something that is positive. That's the way that I've been taught. That's the way that I grew up. I look for the things that Jesus would have us do. I look for the kindness in the stories. I look for that kind of thing. I blame my Sunday school teachers for this. That's what I do. Now, there are some people who will go to the Bible, they will grab it, they will say, "This is a book of rules. You follow the rules and then all will be right." There are others who, like me, go and we don't look for the rules, we're looking for something different. That's just the way it is. You have your own approach when you go to the text. That's the way it is. And I appreciate that, and I know that. Now, when I was going to seminary at the Iliff School of Theology, that was in the early 1990s. In the early 1990s, there were a number of different kinds of theologies that were at play. There was a feminist theology. Women started becoming biblical scholars. There was womanist theology. Black women were starting to have their voices heard, and they were writing books. There was process theology, which was an older theology, but that's the theology that I was clued into. But there was also something called liberation theology. And liberation theology had come out of the Latin America Catholic context. And there was a phrase that the liberation theologians in the 70s and 80s used, which was that when you go to the Bible and you think about Jesus and you think about the trajectory of the Bible, there's a preferential option for the poor. Preferential option for the poor. That was the underlying phrase of liberation theology. And so we were taught that. there is, when you approach the Bible, something in there. That's what Catholic priests said, and then Protestants got on board too, and they said, there's something in there that says that whatever else it was about, somehow these stories and Jesus were about trying to help the marginalized and the poor. That's basically liberation theology in a nutshell. And it's really a little brief nutshell, but that's what it is, okay? Does that make sense? So, preferential option for the poor. I've always had that in my background for the last 30 years, right? When I go to the text, that, along with what my Sunday school teachers and my parents and my grandparents all taught me, is I'm looking for something that has a preferential option for the poor. So, I'm doing the research. If you got your smartphones, you can go ahead and get them out at this point. If you have one. And I came across this website, which is called the Global Rich List. Go ahead and plug it in to your phone. The Global Rich List. It's kind of a weird name, isn't it? So when you click on the Global Rich List, it comes up and it says, didn't make it onto the yearly roll call of the mega wealthy? Now's your chance to find out where you actually sit in comparison to the rest of the world. And there are two boxes there, income and wealth. Which route should I choose? The wealth route is basically your assets, but the income route is what you make in a year, in a single year. And so that's the one that I plugged in. I just put my income in there, and I used the package that I get from church. This is my package. In it is included my insurance, which you pay for, my salary, the pension fund that the church pays for me. And so I plugged it in. And it says select location, and so obviously I selected USA, and then entered the annual income. And then it says show my results. And I hit it. And then it shows what you are in comparison to the rest of the world, your income. $32,500. If you make more than that in a year, you are in the top 1% of the world in terms of income. I make far more than $32,500 a year. So I am in the 0.07% of the richest people in the world by income, by my 1 year's salary, my income. And then it says, this is the funny part, it says, this makes you the 4,405,889th richest person on earth. And I thought, what? In the world? 6.5 billion people? I'm the 4,405,000 richest? I don't feel like that. In America, the top 1%, you heard the 99% and 1%, top 1% make $389,000 a year. So if you make $389,000, you're in the top 1% in America. Make $32,500, you're in the top 1% of the world. That haunts me. When I plug that number in there, that haunts me. And I think to myself, what does this mean when I find myself in that position? Because I can tell you, before I plugged that in, I thought, oh yeah, America, it's a rich country. It's a very wealthy country, but I had no idea. I had no clue. So I have been thinking about that. That has been haunting me. And I'll tell another story this week. So I got a phone call this week from a man whose name was Michael. I was at church here, and he called me, and I had helped him probably 3 months ago. And he had needed some food and to take a shower and to get a hotel room. And I got him a motel room down at the Motel 6 for a couple nights. And as we were talking together, he told me a story, and he was from Seattle, and he had family there and a job there. And I said, you've got to go back there. You go back, that's where your support group is, your circle of support. And so he did. I don't know how long it took him to get there, but he went back there, and he ended up in Olympia, Washington. Now, Olympia, Washington, how many of you have been to Olympia, Washington? No, not very many. Evidently, it is the capital of Washington. I had no idea. I don't know the 50 capitals. I should know that. I didn't know. So it's the capital of Washington State, and it has 51,000 people in it. And there are a number of United Methodist churches, as you would expect in a town of 51,000. There's definitely the First United Methodist Church. So Michael told me that he couldn't get any help from the social services in Olympia. He's in his 30s, young black man. Couldn't get any help from social services. He couldn't get any help from the churches. And I said, Michael, you need to speak to the pastors. You have to. Because he wanted me to help him. He wanted me to put him up for a couple of nights or a night in a hotel there. And so I said, I simply can't do it. We can't start helping people all around the country. Christ United Methodist Church is a wealthy church, but it simply doesn't have that kind of resources, right? So I said, go to the church, and I would say this to you all. When you come across somebody who is looking for some help, whether they're homeless or whether somehow you've got connected with them through your friends or family members, and they come and you are the person who is supposed to help. You are the one that's on the line at that point in time. This is what I would tell you. Tell them, invite them to go to the church, to go to a church, typically a mainline church. Go to a mainline church, Presbyterian, Methodist, Lutheran, Catholic, and ask for the priest or the pastor. Ask for that person. That's what you tell them. Because typically, the priest or what happens is the secretaries are trained, just like social services is trained, to try to weed people out, to tell them they can get help someplace else. That's what we train people to do, essentially. We don't like to say that. We don't like to say it, but that's what happens in reality. So what happens is, tell them to go talk to the priest or the pastor, and then the priest and the pastor, if they have a soft heart, they will try to figure out a way to get them some help. So that's what I told Michael to do. I said, Michael, you need to go to the First United Methodist Church when it opens this morning. Go and find the pastor, see if you can get some help. And then I hung up. I'm haunted by these things. And then I read this story. It is a parable that Jesus tells. And that's the one thing that you have to remember about these stories that Jesus tells. They're parables. It didn't happen. Lazarus wasn't sitting at the gate. The rich man wasn't in the bosom of Abraham. You know that song, Rockin' My Soul, in the bosom of Abraham? That's where the song comes from. These are characters in a story, right? He's telling a story. He's telling a story for a reason. What is the reason? That's what we must always ask ourselves when we approach the text. Why is the story in there? Why did Luke put the story in there? There's a reason. Jesus told the story. Is he telling us something? Lazarus sits by the gate, looks at the rich man, wants that. The rich man doesn't even know Lazarus and says, Abraham, I am now in Hades, tormented. Can you send Lazarus down to give me some water? And Abraham says, no, can't do that. It's too big a chasm between the rich and the poor. Is there a big chasm between the rich and the poor? The 1% and the 99%? Pretty big chasm, we all know that. So the rich man says, okay, so if you don't want to help me in Hades, would you send Lazarus to my brothers? I have 5 brothers. And here is what I would suggest Jesus is telling us in the story, that we are the 5 brothers. We are the 5 brothers. And so we still have a chance. We still have an opportunity. That's what that story to me is about. We still have an opportunity. And then Abraham says to Lazarus, and this is the kind of the twist of the story, they already got the message from Moses and the prophets. They already got the message. I'm not sending Lazarus. He's had a hard enough life. I'm not going to send him. They had Moses and the prophets. They had the story. And Jesus basically ends it there. There's a little piece that's added. I think it's added, which is, I will just tell you this. I'm giving you the good stuff. You would have to pay a couple $1,000s for this at seminary for the first year. There was this thing that finally people in the 1940s, biblical scholars, decided, oh my goodness, as we read through the Gospels, the texts themselves, there's something that says, I think the writers of the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, had their own theological ideas, and they added little pieces of the story to the stories to add their little theology parts in. Before 1940, they just figured Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote it. They just wrote it flat out, just like a court recorder couldn't add any kind of their own stuff, and they called it redaction criticism. Go ahead when you're talking about the Bible and the way that you read it with your friends, you can say, oh yeah, that sounds like a piece of redaction criticism. It's worth it. It's worth it. So at the very end of the story of Lazarus and the rich man, there is this piece where Abraham says, even if someone would return from the dead, they wouldn't believe it. It's a foreshadowing of Jesus returning from the dead, right? It's a foreshadow. But we have to remember that Luke was written 50 years after Jesus had died. And so he already knows that people aren't listening to the stories of Jesus. Already knows it. And so that's why I think it's a little piece of redacted text. Well, that's an aside. But here's what I want to say. Jesus tells the story. He doesn't say, and you should go and be kind to the poor person. Jesus tells the story. He doesn't say, here's a blueprint for how you live life. He just tells the story and lets it land. Just lets it land. And those of us who have come to church, even if we're visiting from California, or if we have come from Texas, or wherever we have come from, if we have been a part of church and we have signed on the dotted line, I am a faithful person, I am a religious person, I am a person of faith. We have agreed implicitly to be haunted by stories like this. We've agreed to it. Why would you agree to something like that? Why would you agree to be touched by a story like that? There's something for us that makes us different. When we come, there's something that we're looking for and listening to. And I think stories like this haunt us and hopefully change us. Yes? Amen.
Amen. This is my